shiny reflective white space and then
Oh
the
yeah.
logo, but oh well. Well, we'll let the people decide. Hello, everyone. This is Ryan Height and Jordan Henry coming to you again. As you see, we're not so much having technical difficulty today as we're trying to decide what is less distracting between the shiny MacBook and the lit up MacBook on the two fronts here. So you can chime in and let us know below in the comments if you find one of these distracting or if you think we should stop giving so much product placement to Tim Cook. It's up to you. You let us know. But while you're down there in the comment section sounding off about the Apple logos, please don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe if you're not already. And on YouTube, hit that little notification, the alert bell to the side. If you're on Facebook, Twitter, go ahead and hit the share button, the retweet button. Let your friends know and your family and your coworkers that this is something that you're watching, and they should too. Because, like we said, we're bringing some of the background discussions of what we have here in the office to you. We put out a lot of publications during the week, but there's a lot more conversations that go on around it. So we'd like to share some of that with you. So after you finish off with the like, share, and subscribe buttons, turn your attention toward the screen and our topic today, which might be a little bit of a different take on a common issue that all of us talk about, the social case for border control. Jordan, what do we mean by that?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. We have a tendency, all of us, myself included, I feel like, to focus our arguments on why we believe what we believe on the things that resonate with us the most. It's a natural human tendency. But I think that when we talk about the issue of border security, there's so much more to it. Specifically, there are a lot of cases to be made for border security that I think resonate as much, if not more, with people who are on the left, who consider themselves to be moderates, than even with folks who you would traditionally associate with advocating for border security. And that's what we'd like to talk through today. Some common points that you can bring up when talking to a friend or family member who is more left-leaning that specifically relate to why we should control our southern border. Three topics that we're going to discuss today. The first is going to be the opioid epidemic. Secondly, we're going to talk about the danger of crossing the southern border and the link to human trafficking, especially sex trafficking. And then finally, we're going to talk about the environmental impact of illegal immigration, especially whenever it's not filtered through the necessary means to keep out invasive species, things of that nature. So as you can see, we're all talking about things that we can all agree on. All of us want to stop the opioid epidemic. All of us want to want to keep people safe and avoid human trafficking, to shut that down. And then also, of course, we all want to protect the natural wonders of America. And border security is a fundamental gateway, if you will, through which we can achieve all three of those important ends that we can all agree on. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, first and foremost, we just put out a press release today. I guess we'll just go ahead and dive into the opioid side of it first. There's big news this week. The U.S. reached a new record high in 2021 of overdose deaths. The new number, and again, I'm sure this isn't obviously hard and fast, but the best numbers that we have, over 107,000 people died of opioid overdose last year. And of the 107,000, more than 71,000 of those, the vast majority, were from synthetic drugs, primarily fentanyl. And fentanyl, as we know in its pure form, comes from China, the number one manufacturer that ships it into Mexico. And it's then cut in Mexico and turned into a much more lucrative product that is smuggled across the border and is the number one leading cause of death for Americans ages 18 to 45. Literally the number one killer of Americans 18 to 45 years old is a product completely traced back to Mexico and then back to China. And it's something that is allowed by the complete open border, or the sections of it that are open, and the policies that allow that to just continue. I mean, you want to talk about a border wall. That's the number one thing I can think of. Why don't we stop the flow of illicit drugs into the country? There's no question that that's exactly where it's coming from. And when you start to look over this, I mean, the amount of fentanyl that is confiscated at the border is mind-boggling. How many lethal overdoses are kept from getting into the country? How many more actually make it in? I mean, obviously, we see a new record high last year for this. But it's really incredible to consider. And Jordan, I'm going to have you chime in here. But if you look back, I want to say that I saw a couple of statistics. I got them mostly verified, that the numbers back to about 2013, 2014, you really didn't see much fentanyl by that name coming across the border. It has been the last few years that it has just, according to the CDC and the DEA, that has just skyrocketed, crossing the border and killing Americans. This synthetic fentanyl rage that has come up is just, it has happened mind-bogglingly fast to the country. Jordan, you have anything to pipe in on that?
Yeah, enough illegal drugs, and specifically those synthetic drugs that you mentioned, illegally cross our southern border every month. Enough of that crosses every month to kill every single American. Mm-hmm. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of pounds of lethal doses of fentanyl crossing our border every single month. And again, this is something that we all want to solve. There is no one out there who's advocating for these terrible, terrible lethal drugs being rampant throughout our communities, our school systems, even. So we all agree on this, and we know where it's coming from. It's coming across our southern border. So it's very important for us not to just deal with it when it gets here, mm-hmm. but to do something about where it's coming in from.
Yeah.
If you see that you've got, a hole in your ship, then yes, you should bail out the ship. But first you need to plug up the hole.
Yeah.
And the hole through which we are seeing all of these drugs come is across the hole in our southern border. So first we need to plug up that leak, and then we need to address the problem of drugs here at home. Because that's going to be how we actually save all of these hundreds of thousands of lives that are lost year after year after year. So we want to keep this short, so I hate to keep moving too fast, but it's important that we do keep moving with this. So the next thing we want to bring up is the danger of crossing the southern border, and specifically the effect on the sex trafficking trade. Now, of course, as you can imagine, crossing the southern border is not an easy thing to do. It's something that leads to deaths every single year of migrants trying to cross the border illegally. And they die, many of them, exhaustion, some drowned in rivers. We saw just a few weeks ago when a member of the Texas National Guard, I believe it was, who actually died attempting to save illegal immigrants who looked like they were drowning as they were crossing a river. So obviously this is a very big problem, and no one wants to see more people dying in deserts along our southern border. Nobody does, on either side. Yeah. But the best thing that we can do in order to stop all of that from happening is not to welcome people across by saying that if you make it across, we'll give you all these social services, we'll give you amnesty, we'll give you this, that, and the other. The best thing that we can do to prevent these deaths is to prevent people from crossing, to make it so difficult to cross, perhaps with a wall, that they don't even attempt it, or at least that fewer people do, so that we can stop some of those deaths and injuries that are happening all the time. And with that comes a link also to the sex trafficking trade. President Trump said in one of his speeches in 2019 that as many as 1 in 3 women and girls who cross the southern border will be sexually abused during the process of crossing the southern border to come to America. That's 1 in 3. Now, there are a number of different studies that talk about this. Some say it's more like 1 in 4. Some say it's more like 1 in 3. But everyone agrees that this is a very, very huge problem. It's well reported, in fact, that many of the coyotes that bring groups of migrants across the southern border will even suggest that the women and the girls take birth control so that they don't conceive during the trip across the southern border. This is a huge, huge human rights issue that needs to be addressed. Something, again, that we all agree we've got to do something about, because this is not pro-woman to try and incentivize people to make this dangerous journey that will result in untold trauma to them and potentially their children as well. So this is something we've got to talk about when we're talking about securing the border.
And this is something that a lot of the political catchphrases that are thrown around about policies like Title 42, the Title 42 protections at the border, which was a COVID era procedure that allowed Customs and Border Patrol to not even accept as many to be processed here. Remain in Mexico was another policy. It keeps coming up in the news. Mm-hmm. What those things do is it enables the Customs and Border Patrol essentially to enforce in a tougher way that there's no incentive for you to get across the border, because then you'll stay here, you'll be processed here, and then you might be let go and told to return for a court date. All of these things are gone. You have to wait over on this side while we do it. And that's actually very key, because it cuts down on one of the key figures that you'll hear about is the border crossings. The crossings or encounters. When those policies were in effect, and your actual likelihood of staying on the American side, even if you were detained, when that went way down, because we were going to make you stay on the other side while we process and figure this out, whether it was Title 42 COVID protections or remain in Mexico, the number of crossings went way down. And that crossing is what we're talking about. The journey, the trip across, not just Texas ranch land and the actual border, but leading up to it, is just so dangerous and fraught with, whether we're talking about, only 1 out of every 4 women is sexually abused, or 1 out of every 3. Well, this is far too many. The fact that we're allowing that to even happen and continue is crazy. To be able to turn off the incentive to come across, to stop those crossings from happening, that right there is an immediate fix to start curbing this number and seeing these situations of abuse and trafficking, significantly go down. Something we can do right now that the Biden administration is moving the opposite direction on. I mean, this is low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. And many of these women know exactly what they're in for before they make this kind of a crossing. They do, but they feel incentivized to come to America anyways because of the incentives that politicians give for these women to make that crossing. I'll reference one story from PBS really quickly before we move on. PBS, far from a right-wing outlet here, tells the story of a woman named Maria Salinas, 43 years old, who recently tried crossing the border with her 18-year-old daughter. And beforehand, she was told to take birth control pills, and her daughter as well. And it turns out that she found out why that was. Whenever they were in the process of crossing the border, she and her daughter, they had difficulty keeping up with the group. And one of the coyotes who was guiding them said that he would help them keep up, but only on one condition: that Maria turn over her daughter to him. That happens, and she refused. And the coyotes left her and her daughter there in the middle of the desert to die. And the only reason why they survived to even tell that story is because of the fact that the U.S. Border Patrol found them and saved their lives. So these are the kinds of stories that you're not going to hear whenever we talk about securing our southern border. And these are the kinds of stories that need to be told, because these are things that we all agree on. We all want for there to be fewer Marias who are traumatized, who are left to die, or who experience rape and abuse, even young underage girls. We all want to see that come to an end. And we need to talk about how we can do that. And I think that border security is a gateway to making sure that that happens, or at least that we can take steps in that direction.
Yeah. And it's a good, I see there's someone under the username Love Horses on our YouTube chat is making a good point. Where did all the Me Too people go?
Right.
Because how is this not one of the biggest Me Too issues of America, in line with any of the other harassment that's described? I mean, this is right there and in the news. So that's a good point. Thank you for chiming in and being active here.
Yeah. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about making the kind of arguments that can appeal to people who are not necessarily conservatives when it comes to border control. And another great issue to bring up in that regard is actually something that we talked about not too long ago, back in March, one of our Phyllis Schlafly Report radio commentaries that aired, talked specifically about the link between saving the environment, to preserving our natural wonders here in America, and securing our southern border. Really some amazing, amazing statistics. How every single day, Customs and Border Patrol processes about 500,000 people, 90,000 truck, rail, and sea containers, and 160,000 vehicles. So, they stay busy for sure. But on top of that, the 2,700 CBP agricultural specialists intercept 264 pests and quarantine 2,500 organic compounds. So keep in mind that even just one or a few of these pests, these invasive species, could totally wreck an entire ecosystem. You can talk about a number of different invasive species that have come here to America and have had tremendous impact on the ecosystem of our country. And one of the first ones that comes to mind is, of course, the murder hornets. Mm-hmm. Everybody heard about the murder hornets, right? Well, all of those that's an invasive species that came over from Japan. And so CBP, they try very hard to inspect all of the cargo that comes into America to prevent these invasive species from coming and establishing themselves and taking over. And yet, whenever you have an open border, then what happens is that more and more and more of these invasive species are able to come in undetected. Yeah. And it can have terrible, terrible effects on our planet.
And that's the thing. I mean, you any kid who watches nature program knows that there's different ecosystems that have different animals, different plant life, and all of these things are in balance. But when you start to, implant something into a different ecosystem, the natural implications can just be astronomical. So as humans are able to travel almost anywhere that we will with air travel, sea travel, we ship things overseas. It's no big deal now. This is a wonderful part of trade and commerce, but with it comes, as you and I, who wouldn't describe ourselves as environmentalists, probably as conservationists, protecting the planet, which I think there's a big distinction, but also some similar goals to protect these great gifts that have been given to us. With that kind of literally intercontinental travel comes a responsibility to make sure that, we don't just wreck everything. As we bring over crates, we don't just bring over a little bug that comes with them that just completely upends the ecosystem of literally one hemisphere to the other. These things, leave it as you found it. I mean, it's, exactly. I think of all of the national, the National Forest Service Act, leave it as you found it and clean up. Well, this is that on a global scale. It just makes sense. So anyone who's concerned about the environment, whether they describe themselves as an environmentalist or a conservationist, I mean, this should be a primary concern, that we exercise care and caution and responsibility as we exercise this great, intercontinental trade that we have. That's such a benefit. It's all part of Customs and Border Patrol, and that's takes away from this job that they have when there are so many apprehensions to be made, or so many people that are needed to not just, pick them up, scoop them back, the Remain in Mexico policy, or have official structures that actually prevent people from coming across. Now we need more agents, which diverts more attention from these other things that a lot of people care about.
Yeah. Not to mention, have you ever been to the Missouri River or something and had to deal with Asian carp? I really dislike Asian carp. I mean, Asian carp, I don't know if you've ever seen these, but they're the ones that if you run a boat motor through a river, they will actually, it'll trigger like a defense mechanism in them. And they will actually try to attack the boat by jumping out of the water, jumping at you. And it's just really, really annoying. Look up some YouTube videos on this stuff. It is absolutely crazy.
Oh, and then the YouTube world full of iguanas, the invasive species in Florida. You went to school in Florida.
Right, yeah.
I mean, the iguanas in Florida is just this phenomenon of epic proportions, but it's, again, not a native species. It's brought over, and the ecosystem, it doesn't have the same natural predators, and as a result, it's just taken over. Not only animal and plant life, but the human population has all of these consequences as a result of an invasive species. Anyone in Florida, we're talking about. This is, these can have far-reaching consequences, and once it's out of the bag, to a certain extent, sometimes there's not much you can do to put it back. But if Customs and Border Patrol can do their job, can have the right resources, not diverted away to these other things that we could fix, but be able to do their job, this is, this has long-reaching ramifications on our environment.
Okay, so folks, 3 different arguments to bring up with your friends and family members who are more left-leaning to help them wrap their head around why we need to secure our southern border. First, we have the opioid epidemic. Then we have the danger and the sex trafficking that's so prevalent on the trip to America. And then also we have the environmentalist case for why we as conservationists need to protect our natural resources by securing our border to prevent invasive species from coming in, destroying agriculture and natural wonders here in America. So what did we miss? I'm sure there are plenty of other arguments to be had that will specifically reach to a more left-leaning audience. If there's something that we forgot, please leave us a comment to let us know. Maybe we can talk about that next time. I'm sure there are a million different things that could be brought up. So please share your thoughts with us by leaving a comment wherever you're watching this video. And be sure to share it with a friend. You know, if this is something that, you know, you're surrounded by other folks that don't believe the way that you do, with regards to immigration policy, share this video with them, or try talking to them yourself and then sharing this video with them, so that we can spread this message about the importance of protecting people and social causes by securing our southern border. So like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss another video. And we will see you all again next Thursday for another exciting Unauthorized Caucus.